This is important is because this is CNN, which I watch, so you don't have to. Let me just read you part of a very, very long article. We'll put the whole thing up on LarryElder.com. You can kick back and read it at your leisure. Worn out by what they see as entrenched dysfunction, lack of focus, key White House aides have largely thrown up their hands at Vice President Kamala Harris and her staff. Thrown up their hands? Entrenched dysfunction? Again, this is CNN. And remember, here's the deal. Joe Biden was dragged across the finish line because they did not want Bernie Sanders, who had just won the Nevada caucuses, to get the nomination because they figured that he could not beat Donald Trump. So Joe Biden, bumbling along, Mr. Magooing his way along, was dragged across the finish line because he was perceived as a moderate that the party could get behind. They didn't care that he was having some issues of cognition declining. They didn't care that he was clueless. They didn't care that Robert Gates, Obama's first Secretary of Defense, said Joe Biden had been wrong on every major foreign policy decision in the last 20 years. They didn't care that, according to a book called Game Change about the 2008 campaign, candidate Obama was quoted as saying, "How many more times is Joe Biden going to say something stupid?" They didn't care about his 30-year-long record of lying about his civil rights record. They didn't care about his record of lying about trying to visit Nelson Mandela in apartheid South Africa. They didn't care about him saying, I grew up in the black church. They didn't care about any of that stuff. They didn't care about him lying about him finishing the top half of his class when he finished at the bottom. They didn't care about any of that. They just hated Donald Trump so much. They're going to drag this guy across the finish line and sort it out later on. The sorted out later on scenario was he would not make it until 2024. And again, that didn't matter. His job was to stop Donald Trump. And then he'd hand over the reins to Kamala Harris, who was chosen because she's a female, person of color, and not necessarily because she would be competent. This is what you get. Exasperation and dysfunction, entrenched dysfunction, lack of focus. Interviews with nearly 36 former and current Harris aides, administration officials, Democratic operatives, donors, and outside advisors who spoke extensively to CNN. Now, why would they speak to CNN? This isn't Fox, CNN. They're scared to death. They see Biden at 38%, Kamala Harris is at 28%. They are scared to death. Quote, Harris is struggling with a rocky relationship with some parts of the White House. Longtime supporters feel abandoned. See no coherent public sense of what she's done. You know what they were passing around an Onion story? An Onion is a sarcastic website, satirical website, mocking her lack of meaningful work with the headline, White House urges Kamala Harris to sit at computer all day in case emails come through. They said there's a rumor that Biden might try to replace her by nominating her to a Supreme Court vacancy. Quote, Harris is the first vice president in decades to come into office with less Washington experience than the president. This is bombshell. And of course, it is being avidly read on Capitol Hill by the Democrats and obviously by Kamala Harris. It says that Kamala Harris has complained to confidants about not being a greater part of the president's approach to Afghanistan. Now, this is a woman who said she was the last person in the room. Now she's complained about not being advised more about what he did in Afghanistan. Isn't that a little inconsistent with her saying I was the last person in the room? Biden often said that about Obama. I was the last person in the room. I gave him the last piece of advice. Quote, and though Harris told confidants that she's been enjoying a good working relationship with Biden, those who work for them describe their relationship in terms of settling into an exhausted stalemate. An exhausted stalemate with Biden? Says Harris has created some problems for herself. She didn't push back on a student who accused Israel of ethnic cleansing, ethnic genocide. And it said West Wing aides weren't going to clean up after that, meaning Biden's aides said, she said it, we didn't. I don't know. Harris's team, quote, was mad Biden had assigned her to handle diplomatic relations with the Northern Triangle nations in hopes of addressing the root causes of migration, but gave her no role on the southern border itself. That became most visible as unaccompanied minors overwhelmed federal government resources. Gave her a no-win political situation that would only sandbag her in the future. Biden's team was annoyed that Harris fumbled answers about the border, including where she gave an awkward, laughing response about not visiting it during spring interview with Lester Holt. Quote, as some around Harris see it, this is really important. The White House failed to come to her defense.